The Wisconsin State Patrol is raising awareness about human trafficking this month.
So it's all a part of a nationwide initiative to tell the public about what can be done to help prevent the crime and protect victims. Northern News Now's Hannah Morgan joins us live in studio to share more about the movement. Hannah.
Sydney Madison, I spoke to the Wisconsin State Patrol lieutenant to learn about how to recognize indicators of human trafficking. The Wisconsin Department of Transportation Division of State Patrol has made human trafficking prevention the law of the month. It's a felony crime that involves the use of force and fraud to manipulate a victim for the purposes of sexual exploitation, forced labor, or services against their will. The department notes it's often a hidden crime that happens in communities across the country, including, according to Lieutenant Tim Weiberg, in Wisconsin.
In northern Wisconsin and northern Minnesota, we're not immune to this type of crime right now with pipelines traveling interstate from Chicago to Madison, the Twin Cities, even up to Duluth. The victims are out there, and we just want people to be aware of it.
And he says traffickers may pretend to be part of an illegal business to approach victims, and victims may be hesitant to step forward, or they might not even perceive themselves as victims. But there are signs that people can watch out for.
See somebody who's always fearful or timid, submissive. They show signs that their movements are controlled. You know, they may be with their trafficker all the time and won't speak for themselves, where the trafficker will speak for them.
The lieutenant says it's important to be cautious of it, and that if something does not look right, contact help. And if someone is in immediate danger, call 911. And if it's not life-threatening or you aren't for sure, call the non-emergency line or the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which you can see right here on your screen. Reporting live in studio, I'm Hannah Morgan, Northern News Now.